Hi again there, fans of YouTube. I want to give a short clan introduction to the clan Gear Chronicle and exactly what they're all about, what they are good at, what they're capable of, what makes them different from many other clans out there, and how that strength, that unique flow, comes out in the way that they fight and how you can use it to your advantage. There's a couple of things there that probably I would say ring. I don't want this series to be about cards that are just good because good cards, meta cards change over time. I want you to understand what Gear Chronicle stands for because once you know what Gear Chronicle stands for, you're ready for the kind of fight that you're going to get yourself in. So let's get started. As is tradition, I will start with the grade 4. Grade 4 will start with something a little bit strange, probably not what you were expecting. Upheaval Pegasus. And Upheaval Pegasus is essentially a board wipe in the strangest way possible. You'll see this trend go around when you look into the Gear Chronicle style of doing things. They mess with time. It's kind of the name Gear Chronicle. It's either forwards or backwards. It's either you or your opponent. Destruction on their side and construction on your side. Kind of a even balance to have to think about. Upheaval Pegasus just screws with that and says, I just want to completely remove the entire setup that my opponent was getting ready for. Reasonable. You didn't actually remove anything because they still get to call 5 cards, but you essentially, if you're running into a clan that has a very specific setup and you just suddenly burst it all down and you basically just threw water over their plan, said, try again, or you don't want to be in a situation where that happens. It's kind of one of those things that you have to see to believe, but it's a thing. You don't really want to feel too hard against a Gear Chronicle. Second command, a little bit more on the older cards. To be fair, Gear Chronicle was the beginning of the Stride era, and because of that, a lot of their mechanics, the ways that you think about them, have to be from their strides, because, every single stride leaves its mark, and in this case, that was the entire point of the deck. Chrono's command, you'll see this trend as you go along with the Gear Chronicles, that large effects for big effects, but if nothing happens, nothing happens. In this case, Chrono's command, on hit, CB1, Soul Blast 1, I believe. Choose a card from your hand, discard it. Your opponent has to spin their entire field. Now, spin is basically their form of returning a card back to 0. Not putting it into the drop zone so much as just shuffling it back into the deck on the bottom of the deck, so there is some difference there, but very minor. Chrono's command is particularly, I would say, very strong card. He forces the opponent, especially, and it completely obliterates rushes where they would usually take the Vanguard hit. Very important to note, Chrono's command, strong card, nice effect. Let's move on. Ragnarok. For a cheap price, he says to you, I just want to hit. I make it very difficult for you to hit, and you're going to have to think about me a little bit. Back in the day when there was only 8 cards in the Stride deck, Ragnarok had this strange difficulty of fitting into the deck because there were so many amazing choices for the G4. Now that we've got 16 spaces, you have to be a little bit more careful because he has a crit and he's difficult to guard for. You must save a PG just in case of him. Not always, but he is a very dangerous card to deal with. Probably the biggest G4 in recent memory, especially since it's so rare and difficult to get a hold of, is Next Stage. Next Stage only works in conjunction with Chrono Jet, which I'll talk about later, but Next Stage is their form of a restand. After Next Stage's attacks, you revert back into the G3, and the G3 gets its own attack, essentially forcing the opponent to deal with a large body followed by a small body that has a special guard. I don't need to tell you that restands are good. That's just a given. What I do need to tell you is because because next stage has such a large cost, it is going to be very difficult for the opponent to get back what he lost. There is a lot of discarding involved in this attack. So be ready, and right afterwards, they are very, very vulnerable. Last of the G4s, I wanted to talk about, I almost forgot, Fate Rider. Fate Rider is one of those cards that you're going to have to check a wiki about how to use him properly. For every face-up G-Zone card, you're looking at 3k power to write about any unit on the field. It is a pusher. It is basically, I have a gigantic field and I'm just going to wipe the floor with you as the end of my game. Great card, really versatile. Early on in the game, his effect is actually quite useful because it optimizes your field before Time Leap was even a thing. I seriously recommend packing at least one, even if you're not sure you want to use it, because that slight power boost and the optimization can really change, especially since this time change is permanent, unlike many others of the Time Leap era. Moving on to the G3s, the only one that really piqued my interest enough to talk about in an intro would have to be Chrono Jet. You'll notice that all of the stride units are very specific in what they do, and the nice thing about these striders, these break strides, is they take advantage of the fact that any stride is useful as long as you do so. His case, CB1, you spin an opponent's card, and that's its on-stride effect. If you reach GB2 and he just attacks by himself, he's got a special guard. Not bad, he's got a power boost, pretty decent, but he's not the greatest option. It's just that he is particularly useful in conjunction with Next Age, and the fact that you can just spend CB1 to essentially retire a rear guard, very good, very consistent. Not always needed, but it's especially useful to have that option there at all times. G2, I'm only looking at 2 cards. There's a lot of very interesting cards here, but we've got limited space, and I don't want to talk forever, really. Upstream is one of those cards that kind of makes you go, huh? When he first came out, Gear Chronicle was making a name for itself as, I would say, a cheap man's Kagero. It was forming itself as the idea of, instead of retiring the opponent, put it in the bottom of the deck, make it sort of costed, but essentially resetting the field to a previous state. The point of Gear Chronicle in many cases was just to delay until your side was complete and the opponent's side was struggling because they kept losing stuff to Chrono Jet. Upstream changed that idea, challenged it, because his effect is essentially get a tiny power boost and suddenly turn himself into a G1 afterwards, because, I don't know, that's how he works, because it happens in the attack phase, and as everybody knows, the attack phase, a lot of funny shit happens. In this case, Upstream is a really good setup for the other cards, especially when we would be talking about things like Time Leap. I don't want to get into that now, but Time Leap is essentially the reverse on your side of the field for field optimization. End of sentence. Next card is probably one that I'm not even sure you've heard of, but I'm sure that you're going to like the idea of almost exclusively. Gear Tapir is a strange card. That's what I would say. Gear Tapir is one of those weird cards where you don't know that you like him until you see the strangeness that is his effect. Choose a card from your drop zone, bind it face up, and rest this card. Choose one of your rear guards and rest it in your opponent's front row, and your opponent puts that unit in the bottom of his or her deck. Now, you just rested this unit. You can't stand him on the next turn, but that's not a big deal. You rest your unit to kill an opponent's unit. That's very Kagero. The difference here being you also return a card from your drop zone to the bind zone, which is actually a very special place for gear. A lot of strange effects happen with the time leap mechanic. Not really a cost. I would consider it a rather useful effect for power, for many different reasons. And he just can't stand. Now, that's not such a big deal. In actuality, Time Leap optimizes it so that you can turn it into something else and use it for whatever other reason. And it comes back onto the field as stand. Now, 8k means that it probably won't attack, but the effect is it disappears because it had to return into the stand position as a completely new unit. Very important card. I highly suggest you take a look at it, especially if you're learning the tricks. It's probably not going to be part of the final trick set that you're going to learn for this clan, but it's good to know anyway because it's a very interesting piece and it teaches you a lot about how technical Gear Chronicle can be. Gear Chronicle can be as technical as you want it can be as simple as you want, and this is a testament to the levels that you can go to make interesting things happen. Going down to the G1, we've got Time Break Dragon, who is essentially the poster child of Time Leap mechanic, I would say. Time Leap is essentially bind your rear guard, look for a copy that's one grade higher. You evolved it, and at the end of the turn, it devolves back. So it's more like Digimon because it moves up and down the ranks. What's important to note is it can happen during any phase. Time Leap is an effect that actually benefits the most from the battle phase because they keep showing up in the stand position, which particularly makes them capable of multiple attacks and a string of smaller attacks. Very strong, very useful. Time Break is limited by his usefulness because he can only be used in the main phase as it's only a call from hand specifically, but it is still very useful. You can even use it in conjunction with the previous card Gear Tapir to make fun stuff happen, and in general just a very useful card to upgrade your field and optimize it before your attack. Great card. On the reverse side of things, a card that came in the exact same time was Steam Maiden Danish, and this one shows the dual nature of Gear Chronicle quite well. I'm showing these two cards together because they really do show the two ways that you're going to have to think about Gear Chronicle. Time Break shows you the field optimization on the left, and on your right you have Danish, which shows you the field destruction. Danish's job is to degrade, to drop the level of things on your opponent's fields. Please take note that if they don't want to replace it with anything, nothing just happens and you get a free discard, or you drop it to -1, at which point they absolutely have none in their deck and you get a free discard. So very useful. If used in conjunction with Time Leap, actually not really retires, spins the same unit twice, sort of spins the same unit twice. Very good, very tricky, and you just have to be careful of certain matchups because they could take advantage of this. TikTok Worker is probably one of those cards that, as a starting player, you won't understand how to use properly, but as an experienced player, you will understand it is one of the more dangerous cards from this clan because of the fact that on right about any turn when a rear guard attacks, you can turn it into an extra attack. Very useful. It is one of those tricky cards that increases the numbers of attacks only for one turn and can create some very amazing combos. Take a watch, not an expensive card to keep around, and probably one of the better starters to have if you don't want to show off your hand early. It's a staple, it's decent, and I'm pretty sure it'll last the test of time just because of how versatile that skill is. Wakey Worker. The last card that I wanted to talk about, mostly because it shows you, again, it reiterates the fact that Gear Chronicle is a clan of time. It is a clan of strides. It was introduced in the time of strides, and therefore it comes with its own way of thinking. Wakey Worker is not considered one of the best cards in the game, but it does show you that yes, we love strides. We love our strides so much that my effect is when I use my skill, you get to use your stride again. And that mere fact does speed things along. It really does promote the stride mechanic, and I think it's an interesting note to end on because Gear Chronicle is centered around its strides. It is the one that changed the game changer that made it so that everyone must focus on the stride. In doing so, Gear Chronicle does find the weakness that if you don't run Chrono Jet, Chrono Fang, you do run into a suboptimal way of playing things, but over time, I would guess that they would come up with more G3s that are reasonably interesting, I would think. Chrono Fang himself is quite interesting. But the golden cards, the ones that cost a lot, the ones that are very interesting to play with, and the ones that you will have the most time thinking about because of the sheer variety of has got to be the G4, because the G4 is like, it's superb. Once again, we're talking about a Dark Zone clan, and Dark Zone are known for their large costs and amazing abilities. Be careful of these. They are extremely valuable and very, very dangerous. I would say in this case, they can compartmentalize very well, but the strides themselves are always expensive. So watch out for their effects. They have very few strides that can actually take advantage of slow fields at the start, and that limits their creative space on what choices they can make. That's all I've got to say. Gear Chronicle is a clan that has a lot of legs, a lot of crazy ideas, expensive costs, and very, very middling G3s, a lot of interesting 2s and 1s, and of course the fantastic, superb G4. You're gonna have a lot of time building this deck, and I would highly recommend them as a start because they are a good place to start. Lots of interesting things to think about. Anyway, this has been my clan intro into Gear Chronicle. Let me know what you want to talk about next, but until then, see you next time.